Moses. He could be his own sermon series. I was actually sitting in my room. I was trying to figure out if I wanted to do his entire life or if I wanted to do just a little part of his life. And I'm really debating this, and I can't come to a conclusion. And it's just, I couldn't in good conscience do his entire life because he is a massive character. And so if you know anything about Moses, I think he's only second to Jesus, or maybe third to Paul. So Moses, we're going to be focusing in on one really big part, his calling. And I think there are a few things that we can glean from this today. So Moses is introduced in the second book of the Bible. The first 5 books of the Bible are the Torah or the Pentateuch. He's attributed to writing these first 5 books. The first one through tradition and inspiration. We believe that the Bible is divinely inspired by the Holy Spirit. The first book, God creates this perfect world, and it's tov, it's good. It's this amazing thing that God created, and humanity ruined it. But God is still faithful. God chooses a remnant, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham has a son, Isaac, who has a son, Jacob. These are the patriarchs of the faith. We're going to hear this a couple times. God's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, Jacob has 12 sons and 1 daughter. One of those sons is responsible for bringing the people of God over to Egypt. This is some background, so bear with me here. Joseph is his name. He brings the people of God over to Egypt by being second only to Pharaoh through an amazing, miraculous turn of events, God really working through him. One of his brothers, Levi, is actually where Moses comes from. This line, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is later where we see Jesus come from the line. So this is one family throughout the entire books of the Bible as we have it. Well, Levi gives birth, he does not give birth. I've practiced this so many times. He has a son named Kohath, who has a son named Amram and has a son named Moses. So 7 generations when it's all said and done from Abraham to Moses. Well, by the time Moses is born, this is a couple generations after Joseph, the people of God had a very high standing in the place of Egypt. Well, that Pharaoh, who was above only Joseph, died. And so there was a new Pharaoh who didn't like the Israelites. He thought that they were growing in number too fast, being fruitful and multiplying. And so he decided that he wanted to kill off the baby boys and let the baby girls integrate into the other cultures around in Egypt. Because he thought the people of Israel would grow in number too big and take over Egypt. This was his great fear. And so he hires the midwives who are delivering the babies to kill the baby boys and let the baby girls live. Well, it says that the midwives feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, and so they let the baby boys live. So his plan failed. That is, Pharaoh's plan failed. So he develops a new plan and hires his people to kill all the baby boys, throw them into the Nile, which there's a little bit of irony in this story, as you'll see here in a moment. But throw the baby boys into the Nile and let the baby girls so that they can integrate into the cultures. Well, Moses is born into this, and his mother hides him for 3 whole months. I can't imagine, like you mothers, hiding a baby boy for 3 months. I can't imagine. That would be very, very hard. Well, when she couldn't hide him anymore, she places that baby into a basket and places that basket into the Nile. This is where that irony comes from. And so Moses' mother trusts God to deliver this baby into some safe passage. And he does. Pharaoh's daughter, another piece of irony, comes out to bathe, sees the baby boy, pities him, and Miriam, who's Moses' older sister, sees that she pitied him, comes over and says, "Hey, would you like me to find a Hebrew mother for you so that she can nurse the baby boy?" Well, this is very simplified. Please go read it. This is in chapters 1 and 2 of Exodus. Well, She does, and it actually is her or his own mother, because Miriam's mother is also Moses' mother. And so, after that, after he's nursed to a certain age, he grows up into the Egyptian way of thinking, if you will. He's there for 40 whole years. His life, you'll see, is broken up into 3 40-year chunks or sections. For the first 40 years, he receives this prestigious education, possibly in the ancient languages. This is a very natural education for this time. But in the ancient languages, both reading and writing, which uniquely equips him for the future when he would write the first 5 books of the Bible in the ancient languages, not in English. It was translated. Also in mathematics, so problem solving, which is a big part of leadership skills that we see him develop and lead later in his life. Also religion. This comes in big when he's confronting Pharaoh, saying to let his people go, let God's people go. He's able to know which God's demonstrating his power over. By each of the plagues, we won't get there today, but each of the plagues is God demonstrating his power over the gods of Egypt. And so, at 40 years old, I'm not at 40 years old, so that's a long time. But at 40 years old, he goes and visits his family, the Hebrews. We can read about this in Exodus 2:11 through 15. One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why do you strike your companion?" He answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." When Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. So Moses, thinking he can get away with it, looking left and right, saying, "Oh, nobody's around," kills an Egyptian committing manslaughter. Well, for an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, another piece of irony here in the story, one of his people, he grew up with the Egyptians beating one of his people, the Hebrews, but we see him identifying with the Hebrews more than the Egyptians, which is an important part as we see later in the story. His nationality is Hebrew. And so, but when he knows that this thing is known, when he finds out that this thing is known, he flees. He is afraid, he's filled with fear, and he flees to a land called Midian, where he spends 40 years in a sort of self-exile. Now, Midian is a nomadic tribe, meaning they moved around a lot, and so the exact distance is unknown to where he fled to, but scholars say a big range from 300 to 700 miles from Egypt is what I found. That's like going from LA to San Francisco or LA to the Oregon border. That's a long way to run, a long way to walk, and I can't imagine having to do that. that would be crazy. Well, in this time, he marries a woman by the name of Zipporah. She's the daughter of Midianite priest Jethro, and in this time he's also a shepherd for 40 years, another 40-year chunk, 40 years, 40 years, 40 years. For another 40-year chunk, he's a shepherd, likely finding himself, who am I? What am I doing? What is my life? What is God trying to do? Why is this happening to me? Why did I do that? A lot of these really tough questions that we wrestle with as a community. Well, during this time, the people of God are still in Egypt. Exodus 2:23 through 25, I want to read this really quick. It says, "During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Here we see that God hears the people of Israel. God sees them, he remembers, he knows them. When I was 13 years old, I was introduced to pornography. And this dominated my life for a long time. It was introduced to me by a girlfriend at the time. She encouraged me to do it, and my peers were encouraging me to do it as well. This was domineering for 4 years. I was crying out to God, screaming at him sometimes in anger. God, save me from this. For 4 years I struggled with this. God, just take these lustful thoughts from me. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Much like the Israelites, according to the New Testament, I was in slavery as well. I was enslaved to my desires, to my passions, to sin. It had its grip on me. I was in slavery. I needed to be set free, just like the Israelites from Egypt. I needed to be set free. And maybe you are there right now. Maybe you're crying out to God right now and you need to be saved from something. Maybe it's not pornography. It doesn't have to be pornography. It could be anything. It could be a situation, a sin that you're committing, a sin that's committed to you. It doesn't matter. You're crying out to God. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I want you to know that you're seen and that you're safe here at Meadows Church. We have small groups. We have people who actually genuinely care about you and want to know you. I want to know you. I might be too young for some of you, but I want to take a pause and see how God delivered the Israelites, or how he plans to deliver the Israelites out of Egypt, and see how he might deliver us sometimes. Exodus 3:4-10 says, now Moses was keeping, Exodus 4, verse 4. When the Lord saw that he, Moses, turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. Then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters. I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of that land to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now, behold, the cry of the people of Israel has come to me, and I have seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppress them. Come, I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. God has this master plan. We see that God responds to the affliction of his people by choosing to send someone, and not just someone, but Moses. He chooses to send Moses to Pharaoh on God's behalf. You see, I wanted God to just use his power to just reach into my heart and just pull it out and throw it away. I wanted him to do that, but he didn't. It's just, I wish I could say from 2 years ago when God rid me from that addiction that I haven't had a single lustful thought since then. That's just not true. I mean, he's rid me from that, but it's morphed, and sin is just so, it's permeated into our lives and culture, and so we need to be a people that responds to it like Jesus calls us to respond to it. And we'll talk about that in a one-on-one. I don't have the time to go into that because I'm going through a lot today. So, but Instead of taking it away, he sent people my way to help lead me out. Some of the people are here today. I mean, my parents are two of them. I'm indebted to you guys so much, and my lovely fiance. I mean, even when we were friends, she was a light, and so it's just he sent people into my life to help lead me out. There are more people than there are here today. He opened my eyes to see people that are already in my life that I needed to confess to, that I needed to confide in, and then also he sent people into my life. So maybe think about some people for a couple minutes here. So in that first position that we've been just talking about, that we just finished talking about, and we'll shift gears here in a moment, you're crying out to God right now. And God is possibly sending someone your way. And so I pray that you don't lose hope. That you don't lose hope. Second thing that I want to shift into is God might be sending you. If you're not in one of those situations where you're crying out to God, like, God help me, maybe God's sending you into somebody's life that needs you. That somebody else is crying out to God, or you're in somebody else's life that you don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and they're crying out to God, and God is sending you. God's pulling your heart towards somebody. God might be sending you. He certainly sent me here today to share some things. So I want to go through how Moses responds to his calling with 4 excuses. The first things he says to God are a myriad of excuses that I think are so unbelievably relevant to us today. It's certainly relevant for me, and I'll make that evident after I go through the excuses. But the first one we can find in Exodus 3:11. Verse 11 says, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt?'" Here he says, "Who am I to do that?" God, who am I? Do you even know me? Who am I to do that? God responds in verse 12. He says, "But I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that I have sent you when you have brought the people of Israel or Egypt, or people out of Egypt." My goodness. "People out of Egypt. You shall serve God on this mountain." I'll be with you. In John 14, verse 16 through 17, Jesus says, "And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another helper to be with you forever. Even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. You know him, because he dwells with you and will be be in you." God promises to be with Moses, and Jesus promises that the Spirit is with us. And so there's some Trinitarian language here, and I can't help it but go into some nerdy headspace, so I'll try to keep it brief, but it is important for a moment later in the third excuse, or the second excuse, sorry. Here we see that the Father is promising to be with Moses, and Jesus and the Holy Spirit are the other two persons of the Trinity. We as Christians confess through the Apostles' Creed and other confessions that God is one in essence being. He is one in everything, one in will, but yet he is 3 persons. Paradoxical. Don't understand it still to this day. I've been wrestling with it for my whole life. It is awesome to see it in Scripture, especially here. The second excuse is Exodus 3:13. It says, "Then Moses said to God, 'If I come to the people of Israel and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them?'" The second excuse is, "I don't even know your name. I don't know your name," which seems like, really? Like that's a stupid excuse. But back then, and still it's true now, names are so intimately woven into our identity. If you didn't know somebody's name, you didn't know your God's name, it wasn't really your God. Mars isn't your God if you don't know that Mars is Mars and he's the God of war. You don't know these things, like you don't know that God, you don't know that person unless you know their name. And so here Moses is really just saying, I don't know you that well yet. Like I don't know you. Like you haven't revealed yourself to me that much. Like I don't know you that well. God responds brilliantly. I love this response. God says, and God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, there's that again, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Did you catch it? God said, I don't change. I will be the same forever. This is the immutability of God. This is a fancy word for he does not change. I am who I am. He's saying who I was yesterday is who I am today and who I ever will be. This is where we get our confession here at Meadows Church and then also in the broader church for 2,000 years of church history has confessed that God is like Jesus. God has always been like Jesus and God will always be like Jesus. If we come to a portrait of God that is different than Jesus, we do not understand anything at all. Jesus is fully God and fully man. Don't doubt me there. Yeah, that is fully true. Yet he reveals God to humanity. He said it is so foundational in the New Testament. And so, if we come to a portrait of God that is different than Jesus, we're wrong. We have to rethink what we believe, just as the Jews had to, that Jesus challenged them through the filter of Jesus. The third excuse. Exodus 4, verse 1. Then Moses answered, but behold, they will not believe me or listen to my voice, for they will say, the Lord did not appear to you. This third excuse is, they won't believe me. God, I'm going to say all these things. I'm going to say all the right things. They're not going to believe me. They're not going to believe me. Well, I don't have time to read verses 2 through 9, but basically God says, okay, here, let me give you signs. He first says, hey, take your staff, throw it to the ground. It turns into a snake. Moses gets fearful and runs. Pretty skittish. I would be terrified too. And then God says, no, do not fear. Pick up the tail of the snake and it turns back into a staff. A cool party trick. I feel like that would be pretty cool. The second one he gives, oh God, if that doesn't work, then the second one, take your hand, put it inside your cloak, take it out, and it's leprous. Okay, don't fear, put it back in your cloak and take it out, and okay, it's good again. This is the second one. And he's like, okay, if those two don't work, take the water from the Nile, pour it on the dry ground, and it'll turn to blood. God has this fancy with turning water into things. Turns water into blood here. Jesus turns water into wine. I thought that was funny. Jesus says in John 15, 18 through 20, some important and yet comforting and helpful things. So let's read it really quick. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. I had this epiphany some time ago. that I can't control how other people react to me. I can't make them believe what I believe. I can't make them react the way I want them to react. To this message, to any message that I promote, to anything I say, to anything I bring up. It was really powerful in my mind when I realized that people didn't even believe the Almighty Yahweh when he was in the flesh. There were people who did, but there were people who yelled, "Crucify him, kill him, we hate you." And now Jesus is saying they hate you because they hated me. They hate you because they hated me. We're with Jesus and we're not apart from him. And if we are truly in Jesus, the world will hate us because we are not of its own. The fourth excuse. Verse 10 of chapter 4. But Moses said to the Lord, "O my Lord, I am not eloquent either in the past or since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and tongue." I don't speak well, God. I can't go. I can't speak. I don't have public speaking skills. I can't do it. I can't. Sorry. Won't do it. I think God's response is just comical here. Verses 11 through 16 say, "Then the Lord said to him, 'Who has made man's mouth?' I created man's mouth. Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak." But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send somebody else." Come on, Moses, get it. God's trying to. God knows. God knows you're the one. And then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And he said, "Is there not Aaron, your brother, the Levite? I know that he can speak well. Behold, he's coming out to meet you. And when he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. You shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and will teach you both what to do. He shall speak for you to the people, and he shall be with your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. And take in your hand this staff with which you shall do the signs." That was a tongue twister for me. Every time I practiced that, I messed it up. So God basically says, I created man's mouth. Moses is like, you send somebody else. God's like, okay, I'll send somebody else with you, but you're going. Your brother will help you. Here. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I'll be with both of your mouths. And also, don't forget the staff to do the signs. Don't forget that. That's important. I don't speak well. John 16:12 through 13, Jesus says, "I still have many things to say to you, but you cannot bear them now." Thanks, Jesus. "When the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into all truth. For he will not speak on his own authority, but whatever he hears, he will speak. And he will declare to you the things that are to come." The Spirit will speak to and through you, if only you open yourself up to him. Jesus says, the Spirit of truth comes and he will guide you into all truth. If we walk by the Spirit, we will not gratify the desires of the flesh. This is a promise that Paul writes in Galatians. About a week ago, I was terrified. I was petrified to tell these stories and get up here and share with you guys. But I was petrified. And I thought I was being too vulnerable with too many people. People are going to judge me, whatever. And I used about every single one of these excuses. And my fiance is laughing because she was there. I was having a panic attack, and I used every single one of these excuses in order almost. And so I want to go through them really quick. I know we're running low on time, but anyway, are we good to go through these really? Okay, I see a couple thumbs up. Okay. So the first one, we can pop up the first excuse that Moses gave, but my first excuse was, I'm not qualified to preach a sermon. I'm not qualified. I'm still working out a lot of things in my theology. I don't know a lot of things. I don't know a whole biblical storyline. I have a lot of things to learn. I'm not ready to preach a sermon. Chris is perfect, but I'm not. I'm not qualified to preach a sermon. It's very similar to who am I to do that? Very eerily similar. Number two was I'm not as close to God as I would like. I wish I was closer to God. I missed a couple of Bible studies in the last couple of months. I forgot to pray every day, and whatever. I'm not as close to God as I would like. Number three. They're just going to reject me. They won't believe me. They're just going to reject me. They're very similar. Number four. What if I fumble over my words or lose my train of thought? Or what if? I'm not a very good public speaker. I like to think that I can talk to one person or maybe three people, but big audiences scare me sometimes. What if I lose my thoughts? I don't speak well. Very similar. I'm sitting here, I'm sitting in my room. Later, I'll let you in a little secret. I was sitting in my room, and I was like, oh. Like a couple days later, I was like, this was a couple weeks ago. But it's okay to be honest with God and others. It's okay. We have this stigma about being honest, especially with God, especially with others. But it's okay to be honest with God because He listens, but He's distant enough to not have any impact in our lives, right? But people, if I confess to Rachel or Trevor or Zach, that's too close. That's too they're in my life. That's too close. It's okay. It's okay to be honest. God can handle it, and the community of believers can handle it, being honest with where you actually are at. You see, I don't have them on the screen, but 1 John 1:9 says, and this is my paraphrase, but confess to God and you will be forgiven. This is something that's preached in churches around the globe all the time. Confess to God and you'll be forgiven. But something that's less preached, and I think should be more preached, is James 5:16, where it says, confess to one another and pray for one another, and you will be healed. This is a promise that you'll be healed through confession and prayer. It is God's power, God's grace, God's mercy, and His redeeming love that permeates our lives, but it is through the conduit of people. God uses people to bring about His plans a lot of the time. And I hope that you've seen that so far, and I hope that you'll see this going forward, and that you'll live it out. Finishing up here, I just have a couple so whats. First of all, it's like we were just saying, it's okay to be vulnerable with both God and others. And it's not only okay, it's actually what we need. We're actually called to it. The second thing is, maybe right now you're crying out to God. You're crying out to God to free you from slavery or something, free you from something, a certain aspect of your life. And I want you to know that God hears you, and that He's near to the brokenhearted, and that there's a great community of believers here at Meadows Church and right here in the seat sitting next to you. In these small groups that we've set up, that Meadows Church, we as the body have done throughout the week, where we get together around a meal and talk about actual life. I pray that you would actually be vulnerable and share that you are crying out to God. And part of doing that life together in the community is the confession part. It's not the whole part. It can't be the whole part. But it is certainly a big part. But as James wrote, it's true healing. And 3, for those of you that are in a season of waiting or on a mountaintop experience, or you just got out of, you just got out of a very harsh valley and you're feeling great on a mountaintop with God, I want to encourage you to be there for your neighbor, not just who you want to be there for. Jesus calls us to love our neighbors, which means everybody. The one that you shop right next to at the store, the one that you sit next to at the movies, like here. Everybody who you're sitting next to right now, you're called to love everybody, and I pray that you would be there for your neighbor. When they confess to you, when they confide in you, I pray that you would be there, or you would be a listening ear, slow to speak, quick to listen. God is sending you to do his work in the world. Jesus' great commission, like we are sent, not just to the unbelieving, but the believing. Shouldn't church look more like a hospital, I believe Matthew West said in his song. Shouldn't church look more like a hospital? And don't let excuses detract you from doing God's work. Amen? Okay.